Religious Community, and Aquaba. Welcome to Espresso Talk Today. I'm your host, Amma Robin, and I'm having my turmeric coffee today. Yes, I'm having turmeric coffee again today for this informative and interesting show. Today, Espresso Talk Today is joined by Professor William Smith from the University of Utah. Professor Smith is going to introduce us to racial battle fatigue. Haven't heard of it? Well, you're going to want to hear the good doctor today. Actually, he's a psychologist, because racial battle fatigue is real and it is damaging our mental and physical health. When I say our, I mean Black folks. This episode is also great because we're having the return of the incredible Hans, who's going to introduce Professor William Smith, and the incomparable Marlene is going to be here to talk with him too, and she's had some great questions. So yes, that's right, my dear brothers and sisters and gender neutral and gender non-conforming folks, we are talking today about racial battle fatigue. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you're feeling this topic and this show, just share it with your fam, your crew, your friends, your circle, everyone in your community. Just so you know, and I'm going to get a little serious here, we will be talking about racism and bringing up some difficult situations, some difficult racial encounters. If this feels too troubling or too triggering, then take a break or listen to this show later. This information is very important, but your mental and physical health are also important. You've got to take care of you. We want to take care of you. We are going to do a breather break during this show so you can take some time to disconnect and process. With that said, I encourage you now to grab an espresso or tea. Tea drinkers are also welcome here too. And close that door behind you. We're going to get deep and we're going to get real. To you now, Hans.
Hello everyone. Welcome to Espresso Talk Today. My name is Hans and thank you for joining us. Today, the Espresso Talk Today team welcomes a special guest, Dr. William Smith, who talks about a serious condition known as racial battle fatigue. Dr. William A. Smith is a professor and department chair in the Department of Education, Culture, and Society at the University of Utah. He also holds a joint professorship appointment in the Ethnic Studies program. Dr. Smith is the co-editor of the book, The Racial Crisis in American Higher Education. His research primarily focuses on racial battle fatigue, which is the cumulative emotional, psychological, physiological, and behavioral effects that racial micro-level aggressions and macro-level aggressions have on people of color. We are honored and excited to have Dr. Smith on the Espresso Talk Today show. So, grab an espresso and get comfortable for this uncommon episode. Let's listen in.
Are you there, Marlene?
Yeah, I'm here. I was thinking we had been talking last time about racial battle fatigue, and I just wanted to get your opinion, Dr. Smith. How would you define racial battle fatigue?
Well, the easiest way to define it is a repetitive stress injury, right? So what that means is it's a biopsychosocial stress response to living in a racist environment that causes premature death, sickness, and a less than ideal lifestyle for infected people. And those are usually the racial minorities in that society. And then within those racial minorities, there is a system that attacks each group independently of each other. And so some of that attack might have more weight in certain domains than it does for other groups. But there are at least four kind of stress responses. There's a constitutional one, there's a social demographic one, there's a psychological one, and then there's a behavioral one. And all those together collectively are how we understand the impact of racial battle fatigue.
Well, when you say constitutional, I'm a lawyer. I'm thinking, what do you mean by constitutional? Are we talking about the same kind of constitutional?
No, not the law part, but what makes you you. So when I see you, I can say, well, that's a Black woman, right? And so there's certain things about you that make you who you are, that without you opening your mouth, which you could just be standing there, then you can receive certain types of racial microaggressions based upon how I identify you.
Is that like profiling?
Oh, it's definitely profiling.
Okay.
Right? So, but it's a way to keep people in their place. And that's what racial microaggressions do. They keep people in their place and keep them out of other places where they're not welcome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so
what oh no, you go ahead.
What's an example? I think we're going to ask the same question. What's an example of microaggression? And you mentioned like a micro level one, or is a small thing happening?
So Dr. Chester Pierce was a Harvard psychiatrist and a professor also in the College of Education. And he's the one who gave us the term racial microaggressions. And racial microaggressions initially meant those kind of subtle, mundane experiences that Black people deal with on a daily basis that causes them stress. All right. So it can be, instead of a macroaggression, the microaggressions tend to cause more damage because we have less coping strategies to kind of keep those things at bay, as opposed to those that are macroaggressions. So macroaggressions are those things that are typically at the more community level, group level, institutional level, right? So if something happens like that, we see the Klan march, we have more adapting coping strategies for that, as opposed to somebody making a racist remark towards us, and that causes us kind of psycho-emotional injury.
I mean, like a common thing I've had, being followed around in one of my favorite makeup stores. I go in there and I'm finding that I'm getting followed around in there. Is that
exactly? And then they can say, well, no, we're just making sure that if you need anything, we're there. Or if somebody gives a backhanded compliment, all the time. So somebody looks at Marlene and says, oh, you're cute for a Black girl. And all of a sudden you think, what do you mean I'm cute for a Black girl? Right? So they might not realize what they said was a microaggression, but Marlene codes that as a microaggression. And any time a microaggression or someone codes it, then it causes some kind of response. And it could be any of those kind of psychosocial, psycho-emotional responses, right? And even if she didn't code it as a racial microaggression, then her body still will respond to that attack. Because while the mind is a great source to avoid conflict, so it can play games, right? You say, well, that wasn't racist. But your body is a human lie detector. So you can't deny what's going on physiologically. Psychologically, you can play mind games with yourself. But physiologically, your body seeks balance. And any threat against your body is an attack. And racism is a violent act against the black body.
What do you think, Marlene?
I think that's. I mean, I relate to that completely. But also, it reminds me of this time when I was in gymnastics and there was a white girl on the floor and I was doing laps and I brushed past her, maybe barely touched her. The next time I came around, she said to me, "African American," and you know, I know it's a little different than what you're talking about, but I couldn't say anything because I'm like, what am I going to do? She called me an African American, but it was, you know, the way and what she actually wanted to say. It was like, so it just makes me wonder if white people, one, are aware of how strong of a hand, even if they think like the oppression isn't visual, that they have like on our psyches. What do you think about that?
Well, one of scholars that I really respect is Monica T. Williams. She's up in Canada. And what she in her research has shown is that there are some whites who don't realize the microaggressions that they are using against targets of white supremacy. However, those are in the minority. The majority of them are use it to keep you in your place, to make you uncomfortable. And those people tend to be more aggressive. So in one of her studies, she calls it microaggressions are a form of aggression. So these are aggressive tendencies that people understand. I can say something, I can do something that can knock you off of your center and put you back in your place.
Wow, so the emphasis shouldn't be on the micro, but that this is an act of aggression.
Right. And so most people misinterpret micro to think that it means something that's very small, insignificant, tiny, instead of a micro level. Like we understand micro sociology, microeconomics, micro business, micro politics. Nobody would ever say that those are tiny politics, those are insignificant politics, those are insignificant money. When they say microeconomics, they understand that it's talking about it at a micro level.
Now let's do some more definition, because I'm still thinking, trying to figure out, like you mentioned, the constitutional, social, psychological.
Oh, right.
One other too. Yeah, if you go to like the social and stuff. I mean, when I was just thinking about being followed around in one of my favorite stores, actually, I'm kind of shaking. You know, I'm feeling a bit of trembling, and I'm thinking, is this an example?
Yeah. Oh, that's definitely an example. And so another black woman that's going with you might say, "Oh, girl, that ain't nothing. Don't pay attention to them." But what they don't realize is these things are cumulative, right? Yeah. So it's like what you explained earlier in the pandemic situation. You were talking about an R naught, what we call an R naught, and that's the infectious rate, right? Oh. So what that means is your infection rate 1-to-1 is less than somebody else's who might have a higher number, like a 2. So for every one person, they'll infect 2. So in our society, what is happening is one person can get affected based upon another person's racism, right? And it usually is much bigger than a 1-to-1 type of contamination, right? Because we have linked lives, we know that black mothers, well, let's start early. Black women who deal with racism as young girls and then young adults will have higher levels of depression as they become older. Now, the linked life part of this is when they have children, when their children are dealing with racial microaggressions, we see a higher impact on depression and mental health condition of those black mothers between the ages of 40 and 50. So what their children experiences impacts them.
Wow.
So that shows how we're linked together, and that also speaks to that kind of R naught infection, right? So what we have to realize is that we're linked together as a community. So we should have more unity than disunity. We should be not fighting each other. We should be fighting white supremacy, right? And so we also see the same thing in Black men. So what happens with them is if their children are impacted and their wife becomes impacted, they become impacted. And we don't see the same thing happen to the wife from the husband, right? Because the wife is concerned about the children and the husband is concerned about the wife and the children. So it spreads all the way through.
So, I mean, even if I didn't experience something directly, maybe I saw something or I read an article about there's some racist act that happened on an airplane. I know of a flight that did happen. That could still have an effect on me.
Definitely. And a good example of that is a study that was done recently. And it's kind of following up on this kind of linked lives ideology. For if a Black person who is unarmed and killed by the police in the state in which it occurred, all Black people can expect to have 1 to 3 months of poor mental health days. All right? Just for that person being unarmed and Black, the rest of those Black people in that state can expect to have 1 to 3 months of poor mental health days. Now, if a Black person who is unarmed and killed by the police in the state in which it occurred, white people don't have poor mental health.
Oh.
If the Black person is armed and killed by the police, Black people don't have extended poor mental health, nor do whites. So it doesn't work across race, right? So again, if we look at that with the George Floyd situation,
right,
then the whole Black community can expect 1 to 3 months of poor mental health days. Collectively, that equals 55 million poor mental health days. And if you compare that to the 75 million poor mental health days that all people who are dealing with diabetes have, then you can see the impact that it has on Black people, and that is a conservative estimate.
Wow, that's huge. That is huge. And when you say like poor mental health, I mean depression days, anxiety, insomnia.
Yeah. All that. All that equals up to racial battle fatigue.
Wow.
And when we think about epigenetically, now there's been studies, and I know some Black folks don't like the animal studies, and that kind of turned me off in psychology as an undergrad student. I'm like, hey, we ain't no monkeys, we ain't no rats, but it really works. All right. So if we look at, let's just say it's a mouse, right? And let's say that mice like chamomile smell. All right.
Okay.
So mice likes the chamomile flower. It go and eat the flower, and enjoy that. Now, if you have it in a laboratory, and you have the chamomile, the mouse goes over to eat the chamomile, and you do an electric shock. Right?
Okay.
It'll run away, but it'll come back and try to eat the chamomile when reintroduced, and you shock it, it'll run away. After a series of shocks, the rat or mouse will avoid the chamomile, right? Never do it again, irrespective if a shock is elicited or not. Now, what happens is when you look at the grandchildren of the mouse, they avoid the chamomile almost from birth.
Wow.
So that is an epigenetic kind of understanding of how this is passed down genetically. So the same thing can be passed down through trauma and stress. That's why it's so important for a pregnant woman to have psychosocial balance in her life when she's pregnant because she's carrying a child. Because the stressful environment that that woman is under will impact the child. Now, the good thing about those studies is that it can be reversed, but we have to understand how. And part of it is a healthy environment, a safe feeling environment, and also plenty of love. And for Black people, what that means is that we have to seek safe environments, we have to promote healthy relationships, and we must have love. So, an overabundance of love on those children can reverse that epigenetic kind of flow, that cellular level contact from the trauma of the past.
Wow. So this shows the healing power of love.
Right, right. So so what you see in those mice is the mice would lick the babies and all of that. But if the mother mouse avoids the baby mouse or doesn't give that attention, the trauma is passed down.
Passed on.
And so that trauma will keep going for generation to generation. And I think Marlene is frozen.
Oh. Okay. Well, she'll come back in.
There
You're good. You're there.
Okay. Well, what do you think? What do you think if this is what we're being passed down? What are white people being passed down? You know what?
Yeah. Well, they're being passed down something similar. And part of what they're passing down is the fear of Blackness, right? That Blackness is a threat, right? So just like we have to be racially socialized to love ourselves, they have to be racially socialized not to fear Blackness or have a negative reaction towards Blackness. But everything that we see on TV, on the news, everything is to reinforce this anti-Blackness. And so what you see is when a situation occurs on television, they don't bring me in to explain it. They bring in a rapper or they bring in some, somebody with a whole bunch of gold teeth and chains. Not that they don't have an important position to make, but they might have a different analysis of the problem than I would have, right? And so they keep giving us a certain type of image, and this is the only thing acceptable. And we fall for it hook, line, and sinker, right? All the time. It's just like when they took over hip hop. So hip hop is a culture, right? Gangster rap is such a minority piece of the culture.
Yeah.
But what they did was they said, we don't care about that other part. We want to blow up the gangster part, right? And that's the only way you're going to get a deal, who ain't gangsters,
Yeah.
And so everybody plays. But then what we do is we critique the Black men and Black women, and it's more a critique on the Black men, right? And saying this is what you're doing to Black women. But gangster rap also is a negative thing. So yes, it objectifies Black women, but it objectifies Black men, but we don't have that lens. So when I show up, they see me as a gangster, as a thug. They don't see me as a professor, right? And what did Malcolm X say a Black man with a PhD at Harvard is called? The N-word, right?
The N-word.
So you have to realize that is being passed down, right? That there's this fear, and then there's also that if they had done to me what we did to them, what they would do to us, right? And we haven't done that. So there's this sense that, man, at some point they're going to wake up and they're going to have a militia. So part of these restrictive policies, covenants, and things like that is to keep us away. And that's why they have this thing in sociology called a tipping scale. And that's when the Black or the white, predominantly white community reaches right about 7% Black. The most mobile whites move out because they're saying that the community is going to turn. And we got to get the value that we have in our house. So it's all, that part is an economic investment, right? So they have equity. Whiteness is a part of having equity, and you don't want to lose your equity.
Right.
Wow.
But I don't know. I'm still trying to think of, back to like racial battle fatigue, and you say that it's a repetitive stress injury. And what other? I mean, I mentioned trembling, and you mentioned some other things. What other? Actually, for me, I should say, just knowing that this has a name has already made me feel better. I'm already thinking, oh, okay, so yeah, because mentally I would say, well, was that something? Oh, well, okay, it was, but I shouldn't let it bother me. But now I know it's okay to let it bother me, because and I know because these things are cumulative. It's not just a small thing.
Right. Well, let me put that in context.
Okay.
If you can name your pain, you can develop effective strategies for resistance and resilience. So it's less about it being okay, but racial battle fatigue allows you to say, it's not just me.
Yeah.
I thought it was just, most Black people don't play the race card. They wonder, well, why am I not good enough? Why couldn't I have done better? Why, they think that whiteness is better, right?
Yeah.
And they devalue Blackness, right? Because that's what our society trains us to believe.
Right.
And so when you don't get the mark on that you think you deserve on a test, and you say, man, I'm not smart enough to compete. Something about me and me being Black, I shouldn't be here. And it might be the subjective nature of the professor, right? So when we look at this cumulatively, having racial battle fatigue as a way to put your pain into a definition that you can understand removes the burden and the weight off of your back to say, this ain't about me. This is a systemic issue of white supremacy.
Wow. I mean, Marlene, I don't know if you've read Michelle Obama's book Becoming, but I know one thing she was talking about was how she used to be in a room with all these people that were really important, and she felt she didn't belong.
Oh.
And and I thought, wow, how can someone like her feel that way? She's so brilliant.
We've all felt that. We've all been in that situation, so we can relate.
Yeah. Yep.
Were you about to say something, Marlene?
So do you?
Well, we can't hear you.
I was just agreeing, but do you think? Is it better?
Yep.
Do you think there's a way to achieve a work environment that is lacking of racial battle fatigue? I know that's a loaded question, but and given white people's history in workspaces, I'm with you right there. But do you think what would be the steps to ensuring that wasn't a side effect of going to work?
Well, since you're in Chicago, you probably have passed bus stops of long lines of Black people going out of their community to right? So I think if we practice more the Nguzo Saba, the principles of Kwanzaa, self-determination, cooperative economics, and things like that, we built businesses in the Black community, I think we can succeed. But we know that every time we get a successful Black community, then something happens. Tulsa happens, right?
Yeah.
Or you have in Philadelphia when they had the move, and then the government bombs Philadelphia and that small community of Black people. So we always know that it's a threat. But what we need to do is to believe in self, empower our own community, and come to the table as equals, as opposed to asking for something. Asking, can I be there and can I have just a biscuit instead of, no, I'm coming up in here and I'm gonna eat the whole entree because I come with economic wealth, power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, they say the black dollar is very powerful. So, I mean, I think personally that's just because we're distracted. But why haven't we, begin to withhold our dollar, why are we so stuck on spending it?
Well, we've been conditioned to do that, right?
Yeah.
So sociologists called it an internal colony, right? And so blacks, he said, lived on an internal colony, and that the resources are on the colony, and we live on the internal colony where we have to leave to go get the resources, work, and then we spend over there, and then we come back to our colony. So what happens really is that black people, we don't spend our money in our own community by to black-owned businesses. So we're the only community that you can see all groups from the outside have businesses in it that we support, but we can't have businesses in their communities, right? And so we're fine with that. So think about it this way: if you spend all your money into these external people that don't live in our community, when they take the money back to their community, they support the Girl Scouts, they support the Boy Scouts, they support Little League Baseball, they support the gymnastic arena, they support ice skating, they support the theater, the performing arts, and they don't support anything within our community. And we don't hold them accountable, just like we don't hold politicians accountable. So what happens is that's called pimp logic.
Oh no, I like that.
That Williams could break that down, right? That's pimp logic, and we become the prostitutes.
So are you saying that this is one way that we contribute to our own,
Well, there's a force against us that so we can't get loans like white people can.
Oh yeah, right.
So and they've done a number of studies in Chicago that shows that audit studies where they'll have a black person go in with the same credentials as a white person and don't get the loan, and the white person gets it. Yeah. So we know that the system is set up not to allow us to do it, even when we want to do it. But we have to expose that system, right? And so what happens is scholars and grassroots activists aren't coming together to do that, right? And so we'll have some grassroots activists who will speak to it, and then they get silenced or canceled. And then some outside external agent will come in and say, well, this person does such and such, and this person was, promiscuous. So they'll label, just like the FBI tried to do to Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And then we start believing that stuff. Now, J. Edgar Hoover already said, do not allow the rising of a black messiah. And then he said, create any kind of story that will cause division and agitation among him and his wife. Right? So then they create these things, and then we say, well, see, Martin Luther King was a womanizer. And then the freaking FBI is the one who gave the story out there and said they was going to do it. And we so gullible that we'll just believe it, the whole tale with no evidence. And oftentimes that's what happens to anybody who tries to become a leader in the black community. There's someone who's going to attack them, right? And we don't do the work to say, is this true or does it matter?
Is it true or it doesn't matter?
Okay, Marlene, what?
No, I'm once again just agreeing.
Yeah, but we accept that in other communities. I mean, even if it's true, JFK, we considered him one of the best presidents that we've had, and he had kind of a colorful past, and
oh yeah.
And I mean, even right now, when people with Trump, people are even, fundamentalist, very religious people are accepting Trump's background and extracurricular activities,
Yeah.
if they're true.
Right.
So,
Well, whiteness allows you to accept whatever benefits you, right? So
yeah.
all of a sudden, all those people who were trying to find, I mean, think about how squeaky clean Barack Obama had to be that they
Yeah.
couldn't find any dirt on him.
Yeah.
And so they had to go to a picture that looked like he was holding a joint when it was a cigarette.
Yeah.
But I mean, but the finger still, it looked joint like. You know? And so we know nobody smoked a cigarette like that. So he might have had a little bit of experience, right? And I think he admitted to that. But and then they tried to talk about Jeremiah Wright as if Jeremiah Wright didn't have a right to say what he said, right?
Yeah.
And so that shows how, in order to achieve certain things, we have to distance ourselves from people who are trying to speak truth to power.
Let's take a breather break here. We're about halfway through this uncommon conversation with Professor William Smith. These are heavy things to discuss, and they're about to get a little bit heavier. So take a minute to unwind, breathe, do some stretching, talk to the ancestors, or anything that uplifts your soul. I will see you in a minute. We are back for the final part of this conversation. I hope that you took some time to clear your mind. I just want to remind you of a few points that Professor Smith said, because they are worth remembering. Racism is a violent act against Black bodies and Black minds. It's real, and it has an effect. Don't let anyone tell you to just get over it or that there's something wrong with you, because there isn't. Racism is an attack, and it should be treated that way. Racial battle fatigue is a repetitive stress injury. This is not just one thing. It happens over and over and over and over again. It comes from different people. It's in different situations. It comes from different directions. It appears differently. But it's the same attack, and it has the same effect. Remember that Professor Smith also said the best way to fight the effects is through having a safe environment, a healthy environment, and an overabundance of love. And this applies to you, this applies to your family, to your friends. Let's create that healthy, safe environment that is overflowing with love for all of us. And yes, I'm not going to forget this, because he's going to keep coming back to this. We have to focus on attacking the real enemy, the real problem, and that is, yes, white supremacy. So, you are not the problem, white supremacy is the problem. Let's get back to the show.
Well, how do you account for the population of Black people who don't believe in racial battle fatigue, or who like similar to the ones who were with the Trump people who stormed the Capitol yesterday? How do you account for those members of our community?
Well, I don't. There's such an insignificant minority, right? And they eventually come back home, right? What they're trying to do is to benefit off of token whiteness agenda, right? Now, some might believe in certain principles, but others, black people, just like any other group, are opportunists, can be opportunists, right? We're not a perfect group, so there's opportunists amongst us, right? And it's just like, think about it this way. 80 updated data that I saw, 86% of black men voted for Biden. 94% of black women voted for Biden. Yet, didn't you see how much controversy there was in the media about black men not voting in the numbers like black women?
Yeah, I did.
Like it was a problem. Like they don't have the right to say, either I'm going to be independent, I'm going to vote for somebody else, or I'm going to vote for Trump, but for whatever reason. But yet, black men were the second highest to black women and above every other group. But black men were a problem.
And is that so? I didn't know that.
Yeah, no other group came close to blacks. No other group came close to blacks. Even Latinos were split, and nobody called them out. Both men and women in Latina groups were split. Biden and Trump, nobody called them out, but they called black men out. That's always an exercise to keep division. When you get 86%, 85%, 84% of a vote, that's outstanding.
That's great, yeah.
But we should also hold all those people accountable too, because just giving your vote as a matter of fact without a demand is problematic.
Absolutely.
So, but nobody will say that, right? So nobody said, well, black women, why y'all giving 94, 95, 96% of your vote to the Democrats, and black men, why are you giving 84, 85% of your vote to the Democrats and not making demands?
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's right.
That should be problematic.
Well, that was a question of fear, whether black people or, people who voted for Biden in general were going to hold him. He, calmed us down with, when he was battling the Trump show. But are we actually going to hold him to these ideals? Are we going to not stop until we get what we want?
No, we don't have a history of that yet, a contemporary history of doing that. And Biden even told you ain't black if you ain't voting for me.
Yeah. Yep.
Would he have said that to any other group?
Yeah.
So we got to be better than what we've been. So we need to study the 60s and the 70s very in-depthly to understand how things changed, how families got broken up, how the prison industrial complex got developed and why it got developed. So all of these things, social, because remember, part of this stuff I said about stress and a stress response is social demographic. So part of it can explain the south side of Chicago or the west side of Chicago and poverty. But what we fail to look at is what about so-called successful black people? They're facing the same, so it becomes social demographic that way too. Because here's a good way of looking at it. There's a study that shows that black women, I should give you a quiz since I'm a professor. So let's look at 4 groups: black men, black women, white women, white men. Those people with just high school education, who sleeps the less?
Black women.
I say black women. Yeah, it's black women. Black women.
Who's second?
White women.
Who's third?
Black men.
And who's fourth?
White men.
White men.
Okay, that's pretty close to true. Black men are just above black women. Now, more education, college education and above, who sleeps the less?
Probably people with more education.
No, out of those four groups. So those people.
Black women.
Oh, Black women, yeah.
And then
Yeah.
second.
Black men.
Third.
White women.
And then white men fourth. All right.
Yeah.
Black men have shorter sleeping patterns than all other groups. Then black women, so there's a gap. And then white people sleep well.
Oh, they sleep well. All right.
So they're pretty close together, right? But when you follow that trend line, you see crisscrosses, and then with more education, more income, white people have better life circumstances and sleep much better. Black people aren't saved from that. And that also is a factor of racial battle fatigue, right? So the more education and the more income that you tend to acquire will often move you out of the black community.
Oh.
And once you're in a predominantly white community and a predominantly white business or occupation, then there's a different type of stress that you're going to be dealing with that causes all kind of other symptoms consistent with racial battle fatigue. So you sleep less, you are more likely to be depressed, your children are more likely to have suicide ideation, and if they have suicidal ideation, then you're going to be more concerned, your stress level goes up. So the things that you give up in being in a predominantly black community, even a predominantly black professional community, is far worse than what you gain in with your education and income and in a racist environment, that you're exposed to much more of that. So the black man will be followed by the police more often.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Now I got to worry about that. The black woman's going to shop in certain spaces that she can afford to buy more expensive things. You're going to look more like a criminal.
Yep. Yep.
You're going to typically be the only person who's black there.
Yep.
Now you got to be on guard. If you're on guard all the time, then your stress is high. Mm-hmm. And then when your stress is high because you're on guard during the day, when you go to sleep, you take that to bed with you at night. When you take it to bed with you at night, you dream about those things that could occur the next day. When it occurs the next day, or when you're thinking about it occurring in your dreams the next day, you're just as stressed while you're dreaming, sleeping, as you are when you're awake. So when does your body get physiological relief? When does it acquire homeostasis? It doesn't. And that's why I said that black people rarely understand what it really feels like to be human.
Oh. Well, I remember we were talking, and when I was saying when I go back, I live in Belgium. When I was planning to go back to the U.S. During the summers, that before I would go, I would have nightmares. And
really?
Yeah, I did, and especially as my son became older, really became into manhood, I was really I didn't think I was thinking about it that much, but I would have these nightmares and this stress and this worry. And I have to be sure to tell him about this and teach him about that. And there was definitely, insomnia and anxiety, all related to that. And nothing had actually happened yet. It was just thought of it.
Right.
And I'm wondering if people, going to these, to their jobs, they get up in the morning just thinking, wow, I'm facing another day of possibilities. You were mentioning, swinging between risk and fear.
Right. So that's been our life condition as black people, is that we have to navigate between risk and fear. Right? So if we stand up, if we speak up, if we do these things, we always have to have kind of a mental conversation about when it is appropriate to respond versus to accept or take or just deal with it, right? And so that's a risk and fear kind of equation. So sometimes we're fearful of the results if I do X, and other times we challenge the risk nature of responding or addressing issues. And both of those can cause stress. And so, as a part of it, let me give you some of these symptoms of racial battle fatigue, since we brought that up. So, psychologically, it could be frustration, defensiveness, apathy, mood changes, shock, anger, disbelief, disappointment, helplessness, hopelessness, fear. So all of those things, one or more, can be psychological stress responses to racial battle fatigue. Some of the emotional behavioral responses could be stereotype threat, John Henryism or Jane Henryism, which is that prolonged, high effort coping, based on increased kind of commitment to proving somebody wrong.
Yes.
We might focus more on spirituality. We might lose our appetite. We might eat more, right? So there's been studies that show that Black women who have suffered with daily racism add 10 to more additional pounds in weight.
Wow.
Now, I often say, especially when I'm addressing Black women, I don't use racial battle fatigue as your excuse for being overweight. You can explain part of it, but the other part is that we have to do something about it. So if you realize it, then the adaptive coping strategies that you employ must address your health. And so that means we have to be in shape, because what racism is, what gendered racism is like a heavyweight fight. And if could any of y'all box one round, most people would like tire out that round. So you have to go 8 rounds dealing with racism, and you don't realize it. So we have to be in shape, both mentally, psychologically, physiologically. So some of those things, again, you might increase your spirituality. You might step away from spirituality. You might increase drug use, drinking. So all of those are the emotional behavioral responses. The physiological responses, it might be headaches. You might grind your teeth at night when you sleep. You might find yourself clenching your jaws a lot. You might have shortness of breath or chest pains, or feel like your heart is about to jump out your chest. You might have insomnia. You might have frequent illnesses. Some people even get hives.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't mean that you have to have all of those things, but one or even more might be symptomatic of racial battle fatigue.
Wow, I mean, this is stunning, because I, think that, wow, somebody's experiencing headaches, they go to their doctor, and would the doctor even... Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And some medicine that's going to cause 5 other problems. So
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And most therapists aren't trained to understand racial battle fatigue, or racism, right? But fortunately, there's a growing movement of therapists who specialize in racial battle fatigue. And obviously those would be more Black or non-white people than they would be white. But there is, we even see it on college campuses, that some counseling centers now say that they have somebody who specializes in racial battle fatigue.
Fantastic. Well, that's really good. And this then would only be for Black students then?
No, other racially marginalized groups too.
Okay.
So Latinas, Latinos, Asian Americans, Afro-Latinos, African immigrants, immigrants.
Do you fear that if we have programs like this, or therapists and psychiatrists who are taught to identify it and treat it, and suggest things, are you afraid that if we let too many of minority groups who claim to have experienced racial battle fatigue soon be like, we experienced it too, we deserve a space in there. Would you give them a space in there? Or
Yeah.
you know,
No,
because
I'm pro mental health.
yeah.
Yeah. So the everybody deserves to be healthy, right? And if there is a system in place that doesn't allow you to have optimum health, and I'm talking about balance, stress knocks you off balance. Okay, so there is a difference between stress and racial battle fatigue, because there could be some good stress, right? Um, you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
The bar exam was stressful.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure.
It was.
But that stress caused you to prepare for the exam, right? And you got motivated to do the best that you could do. So all stress isn't bad stress. And it could be a psychological threat. But racial battle fatigue is different than that, because as I said, it was a repetitive stress injury. It happens over and over and over again. And that can be something that any racially marginalized group can have. Now, the unfortunate thing is, it seems as though blacks at every subgroup level report the highest number of racist events and also poor mental health. Okay, so I don't care how you decipher it. If you're a gay black man, if you're a lesbian black woman, if you're a transgender black man, you're gonna face more, or you're gonna report more racism than every other group, and it's not even a close second.
Wow, not even a close second. Well, what about this? Would you say that it should be defined, a defined disability?
No, because the disability would say that there's something wrong with us, right?
Okay.
Instead of white supremacy.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's true.
what happens is that it would be equal to saying, you know, why do black people have more lung cancer than everybody else? Y'all just don't you're doing something wrong. Instead of having that big industrial racism where you have factories and smoke all around us, right? High voltage wires in our communities that causes the symptoms that we have, that causes the health problems that we have. You need to remove that. You need to clean the air up, right? Then we will have less lung cancer, right? So I'm a result of a toxic environment.
I see. Okay.
And so what happens is people, and if you can look at most researchers, because most academics, many academics are disingenuous and untruthful, and just like many politicians, they're out for personal gain. They'll say that, for instance, they'll look at black men as pathological, that you're born problematic, right?
Yeah.
And we'll look at, say, women in general and say something happened to them environmentally, right? So we'll treat it as an environmental problem, right? That caused them to become what they are, or be in the condition that they are. Black men, you were born problematic, almost like genetically, instead of something happened to you, like the conversation we had earlier. So if you just watch TV, watch the media, watch some of these so-called scholars talk about it, even black men, when they talk about, gangster rap is an example of that. There was a special issue in a journal that talked about gangster rap and the problems that it had. Black women scholars, black men scholars, both co-authoring together, all of them came up to similar conclusions. It's objectifying women, it's misogynistic, it's all these different things, right? And not even the black men ever said what it is to black men, about black men. Because in their own heads, they've been tricked. Just like Carter G. Woodson said, if you educate a black person at Harvard and bring him to the black community to teach, he can be just as problematic as a white person in a black school. So I don't trust all black men who are scholars. I read your stuff like you just because you black don't mean that you understand blackness.
Right. Right. But I was going to ask you something. Oh, okay. On the flip side, though, okay, when things that we consider positive happening, like the election of a President of Obama, or we see, let's a policeman who has, killed a black person being indicted or being even put in jail, is that something that helps relieve, battle fatigue? Something that pulls us together, or what?
Yeah. Well, it offers some psychic relief, but it's short-lived. Because does it really impact us on a day-to-day basis, other than the psychic relief that it offers, right? So we can all feel really good that a black woman is vice president. It never happened, and she's only one sickness away from being president.
Yeah.
And we would all say, well, that's so great. But how will it really impact the lives of black people? Just being in that office doesn't necessarily mean that you will do something for black people.
No, but I think particularly the older generation that loves seeing black people in positions. There's a real pride there, and
it's definitely a pride, but that's all psychic, right? So emotionally, we feel great to see that. Finally, we've done it. Yeah. But if the person doesn't represent the group self-interest and will do something for the group self-interest, and we always, as black people, give third and fourth and fifth and sixth chances.
Yeah, we do.
We even said that about what's the black Supreme Court Justice?
Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas. Once he get in there, he gonna show his blackness. Right? He gonna show up different. Y'all gotta remember, he was a student Black Panther when he was in college, right? So that's gonna come out. He just got there because he knew what the system was like, and that's why he was acting conservative. Then he became the most conservative of the conservatives.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So just because it's that saying that we have in the community, all skin folk ain't kin folk.
That's true.
So that's what we have to see. Look here. If I wanted to hire you as a lawyer, I'm gonna look at your resume, right?
Yeah, right.
If somebody's gonna hire me as a professor, they're gonna look at my curriculum vitae, right? And they're gonna say, okay, this justifies why we should bring you into the position for a professor. We don't look at people's resumes in the black community. We just look at them. And if you black, that's good enough. We don't ask no questions, and you wouldn't do that in any other way. You wouldn't just, somebody show up and you just give them your money because they look like a banker. You wouldn't do that. But we have to be much better. We have to be stingy. And we got to say, you got to give us some promises, and we're going to hold you accountable. And if you don't come through, we're going to vote your butt out.
Yeah, I just don't think we're looking that deeply at all, though.
No,
I think
because we still on this, because of oppression, and because we've been oppressed, and because we don't see these things, it's a psychic relief just having a black face in places where there haven't been one. And that just ain't enough.
Right, or hearing that.
We need
or hearing that the cop was indicted. It's like, oh, okay.
Right.
You can kind of say.
That was one of thousands.
Yeah.
Most police do not get arrested for killing black people.
No.
And And even with Breonna Taylor's killers, they're still out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No arrests have been made, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there was arrest, he was let go on bail, on a little bit of bail money. And think about it this way: when you kill a black person, automatically there's money raised to
Yeah.
support your release, just like Dylan Roof
That's right.
kill all the black people in the church and the police take them to McDonald's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if it would have been demonstrators around Breonna Taylor and George Floyd who stormed the Capitol to say we want to make sure that Biden gets elected, they all would have been gunned down.
Yeah.
So that was an example of white privilege, because white privilege is synonymous with white power. So every black person, when they saw that, they said, if to themselves or to somebody else, they said, if that would have been a black person, the outcome wouldn't have been like that. There's no way a black person can break the windows in the Capitol, can go in and get the podium of the Speaker of the House, sit in the chambers, take selfies, and come out alive.
No. It's almost laughable.
Be escorted out. They were escorted.
Right. Be escorted out. Come on. And be helped in some cases. So that also feeds into our racial battle fatigue, because we understand the irony of life. We have different lived experiences. So black people will say, no, there's more racism, and we experience it. And then white people will say, we're in a post-racial society.
Wow.
But we know the realities. Just like I said, higher infant mortality, higher maternal mortality, all these things impacted because of racism that happen in the black community. Why are we at the largest percent of all of these things that lead to mortality and morbidity statistics? Disproportionately, why do we find black people there if it's not something systemically wrong?
Systemically wrong.
Anything that black people are a victim of racism, and that can answer the majority of our problems.
Okay, so we've heard about some maladaptive strategies that we take on, about increased alcohol or something like that. It's understandable. But what are some of the? I mean, you mentioned about love, and love is great. What can we do? What are some of the ways we cannot be left with? There's no hope, but we have to get rid of white supremacy, because that's not going away soon, I think.
No.
What can we do on a daily basis?
The way I look at this is, we have to realize that racism, again, is a violent act. And if it's a violent act, then it produces trauma. So I know we might not want to say that we've had traumatic conditions. But if we accept the fact that racism is a violent act, that the body codes racism as violence, so it responds to that, and it's trauma, then we need to have trauma-informed care that we use for racial battle fatigue. What does that mean? I have 4 R's for trauma-informed care for racial battle fatigue. First, we have to realize that systemic and individual racism is real.
Okay.
We have to realize that it also is real that racial battle fatigue exists. And then we have to seek resilient, adaptive coping strategies. So that's just the first R, realizing. The second R is recognizing. So we have to then recognize the signs and symptoms of racial battle fatigue in oneself, in your family, and in your group members. All right? Once we can identify that by recognizing it, then we can use resilient coping strategies to try to deal with that. And that gets to the next R.
Okay.
Respond. We have to respond by fully committing to strength-based, asset-based coping strategies. And those are those things that are healthy racial identity development things. Howard Stevenson is a great psychologist, and part of his racial socialization, racial identity coping strategies is several things. One is protective racial socialization, proactive racial socialization, and adaptive racial socialization. Now, the proactive is that kind of spiritual or religious coping. The other part of proactive is the cultural pride reinforcement, because whiteness and white supremacy tries to attack the cultural pride of Black people to think that we don't have anything to offer. The extended family care has always been a part of it, and that's another aspect. All right. So the protective racial socialization, the proactive racial socialization, and the adaptive racial socialization are the things that Howard Stevens offers us. And that gets into part of that resistance. So realize, recognize, respond, and resist. We have to resist individual, institutional, and systemic efforts at racial re-traumatization. Right?
Re-traumatization. Okay.
Right. So if we do those four things, then we can have hope. Dr. Pierce said that when hope is compromised, stress goes up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that gives us hope. Now, to address Marlene's question about becoming an effective ally, what they have to do is what I call the 4 A's. They have to become aware, because most of them are blind to the realities of systemic racism. Then the next thing they have to do is accept or have acceptance. Part of that acceptance is an understanding of systemic racism and white supremacy. Next A is assurance. They have to offer assurance, which is a commitment to social justice, to anti-racism.
Okay.
And then the last A is action. All right? Action is a verb. So a verb means movement. You have to do something. And that action is your resume. So we have proof that you've done something. Too many white folks, once they become aware or accept, they want to jump to action. But part of the thing is, in the commitment, is to learn. Don't just try to come to the front of the line just because I see now that white privilege and white supremacy is real. And now you want to be the head of the movement.
Yeah.
We've been doing this for over 400 years.
Right.
Well, similarly, I feel like I encounter a lot of white people when I bring up these issues and help to or try to inform my colleagues and my friends. I get hit with emotion. They're so overcome by the fact that, they can't even fathom what we've been through, that I then need to turn around and coddle them because it's hurting their feelings.
Yeah.
How do I work through that and instead, get over that hump and tell them, straighten up. It's a big deal, but you can't do it while you're crying.
Well, I forget what that technique is. It don't happen really in the Black community, but it's when you let the baby just cry.
Oh yeah.
And then they soothe themselves, right? You just let them cry, soothe themselves, don't comfort them, because those are called white tears.
White tears.
Right? So it distracts you from really the issue at hand and turns the focus or attention on them and solving their emotions, right? So now you're spending less time about the issue of systemic racism, and you're focusing on white tears, right? If you want to cry, cry. All right, yeah, I understand you seeing the reality. That pain is real. I understand it, but I ain't got time to be giving you Kleenex, right? I have to deal with this on an everyday basis, and that's also an indication of their awareness of what many of us do not aware, and that is how far from being fully human we are still today. Because they realize the balance in their life. Like, white women are the most protected group in the world.
Yeah.
right? And so they can float on and they can do certain things and have a lot of privilege. And the protection of white womanhood has always been a part of patriarchy, right? So we understand that. And so for them to have a reality of that everything is pretty cool and I can just I can work hard, I can do these things, but I know that it's my skin color and my whiteness is not going to be held against me. When they realize that that isn't true, for those people who become aware, realize how a black woman, no matter how hard she works, have to go through all of these hurdles, that becomes painful for them. You don't see it as pain because that's all you know. So that's normal. And that's the unfortunate part because you've never been somewhere where you haven't had to deal with gendered racism. And that's why racial battle fatigue is not post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
It's a repetitive stress disorder or injury. It's constant.
I'm thinking about, you saying we can't go anywhere without feeling it. I'm in my house and I feel it,
Exactly.
I'm feeling it. I feel
Right.
it. I'm in the most comfortable spot, that's supposed to be the most comfortable spot, but I'm still feeling like I should keep an eye on my neighbors.
Yes, because you don't know what safety fully feels like. And sometimes the unfortunate thing is we have to get more coupled in the community. So we have to have a significant other because there's usually one who takes the role of that I'm going to make sure that this whole house is protected. And then one is going to say, well, I'm going to spend more time making sure that we're comfortable, or they balance it off some. And it's just like if you look, there was a CDC report. This is how uninformed we are about black folks. And again, really on black men. Black men are the most, by the CDC, and the CDC is not our friends.
Right.
The CDC report said that black men spend more time with their children than any other group of men, even when they're unmarried.
Really?
Yes. The CDC has a report on the involvement of black fathers, white fathers, Mexican fathers, Asian fathers, spending time telling bedtime stories, walking kids to school, eating dinner or eating breakfast or whatever. And we, black men, spend more time. But see, because our reality, so if your father didn't do that, don't mean that all black fathers didn't do that. But what we do is we say, oh, that ain't my experience, but your experience ain't the whole black community's experience or your neighborhood experience. Maybe there's no black fathers in your neighborhood, but that don't mean the whole black community is like that, right? So we ignore those things so we don't have hope. So stress is high. If I have a black man, they don't offer me nothing, right? But then when we see these studies and we say, wow, he's much more involved than any other group, married or unmarried, to the mother, right? Or that he might be when the children feel more safe, right? So the stress from racial microaggressions are removed when you have a black male presence in the house. And when you have that in the house and he and the mother, the wife, are loving each other and have a loving situation, she's less stressed, right? And then she offers stress relief to him as well, right? But we've been taught that we don't need each other.
Yeah. But we've also been taught that, black men are just shirking their responsibilities, and just like the data is just not even proving that. Right. I mean, it does happen, but overall the data's not showing that.
So you have some of that, obviously. But when you look at a larger level and we examine the data, it doesn't appear to be true. In certain communities, In certain micro neighborhoods, we can find that that is true. But we also find those other competing elements out there. And then what we also see is that some black women will report, oh, no black man lives here because they're getting assistance when he actually comes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right? So in order to keep the assistance, I have to say that you don't live here. And we all seen that, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the data then says that it's something else. So we just got to do our own research, and the issues and problems that we do have that are legitimate, we need to address. Then the good things about us that we know are there, we need to support that. We have to understand the full strength of black women, right? And that if anything, because she's the most unmarriageable, right? She's the most overweight. So all these other things we could say, but we can explain a large part of that away because of systemic racism. So we shouldn't be saying, oh, yeah, black women, no, I don't need one of them. Are you freaking kidding me? That's the queen of the world. That's the mother of civilization. And what we don't understand is the strength, the full strength that a black woman brings to society. And that's why there's a part in one of the religious texts that say that you do not put a basket over candles, right? You allow the illumination to light up the world. And what we're doing is unconsciously, we're putting baskets over black women, black children, and black men, right? And not allowing them to illuminate the world because we believe this false data.
Well, I mean, when we talk about entertainment as well, you know, I know that there are a lot of black stories that are coming out, and you know, for a long time there was only a couple different type of black stories coming out, but even now that are produced mainly by white people. Yeah, there's Tyler Perry Studios, and Oprah Winfrey has her own set of studios as well, but even those shows that are produced on those networks are the ones that perpetuate stereotypes and negative images in all respects against every single minority of black inside of black people.
That's all they allow. Yeah, that's all they're allowed to do.
That's all they allow.
Yeah, and so you can make money off of that, right? So again, remember I said that every group has people who are opportunistic and can become very wealthy. And just think about the stories that are allowed to get out there, and think about their connection to wealth. Most of the stories that are out there that has made people rich have been highly stereotypical, dysfunctional stories about black people. Color Purple, some of Tyler Perry's movies. I mean, all these different things. Now, one can say, well, does not some of that exist? I know that's a double negative. I would say yes, right? But is that the whole story? Do we get the full picture? We tend to get the full picture of experiences of white people. So when we see something that's negative, it's offset by the curve because it's at a tail. So the median is some typically good experiences. However, we get the negative end of the tail for black people. We rarely get the positive stuff. So even when it's a little positive, it's always a pathological, stereotypical thing. The black woman got to be in the ghetto, no husband, 4 kids, 3 babies, daddies. Black men got to be coming out of jail, ex-con. I mean, if you're darker, you're closer to criminality. If you're lighter, you're closer to whiteness and smarter. If you look at New Jack City, when that movie came out, I had my students evaluated. They couldn't understand it. I said, look at Nino Brown. Nino Brown was the darkest in New Jack City. And then Christopher Williams was the lightest. He was the banker, right? Now, Nino Brown, if you look at the color shades of the phenotypes of those people, the closer to criminality and violence that they got, the darker they got.
The darker. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we see the same thing. The darker you are in the Black community, the more hypertension you tend to have.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a phenotypic response, and that's part of the constitutional stress that I talked about.
Okay. Well, this has been really interesting. There's so much here, to discuss.
Yeah.
Don't you think, Marlene? I mean, I love going to the politics as well, but there's.
I mean, thank you for sharing your scholar with us, because there are levels of things we could talk about. I mean, you just have this wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate you letting us tap into that. Would you say that, like, I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth, but would you say that life has been your biggest teacher, or what were your biggest learning opportunities, to help complete your education, or to ground your education in things?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely life. And then when I realized that I was being miseducated, as Carter G. Woodson would say, right? That what we don't look at is data. Anytime somebody offers you something, you should say, okay, where's the data to support your thesis, right? If somebody says something about Black women, show me data. I don't believe it until you show me some data. I don't care about your opinion.
Yeah.
Right. So when I see data, then I can analyze data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. So what I don't do now that I used to do is just take things wholesale. And if you look at some of my early work, I fell in line with the majoritarian sentiment. Okay. And I realized that, I'm not speaking the full truth here, right? That I have blind spots. So my struggle has always been to remove blind spots in my theories and my way to analyze data. And so that's always, if I find a way to be better, sharper, more magnifying, more analytical, that's what I will do. So yes, life has been my lesson. And many people can get very rich off of publishing pathologies about Black people, right? If I was a conservative and I wanted I can write, about the Black family and say all kind of negative things and become rich. But what I want to do is attack white supremacy, institutionalized racism, and have people have a healthy condition.
It seems to me like white supremacy is kind of where it's at, and it's easy to get distracted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you don't see people talk about it. They don't name names, right? No. You never see that. You never see a college professor name names. They'll talk about something like, oh, it's the structure. Well, who's in the structure?
Right.
Name the day. Oh, no, we can't go there. Right? That's why it's always easier to attack the oppressed group than to attack the oppressor.
Yeah, it always has been.
Yeah.
Well, we do hope that, you'll come back on, for another espresso. I've actually finished mine now.
All right.
But I hope that we can be for another espresso one day.
Yes, I enjoyed myself, and I will definitely, you call, I'll come.
Thank you so much, Professor Smith. It's been so, really learned so much. And I appreciate you've been great. And you too, Marlene. Always happy to see you too.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Happy New Year.
You both take care and be safe.
Sure will.
You too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Espresso Talk Today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Smith. So, let's have some after coffee thoughts. This was definitely a helpful and interesting conversation in which Robin and Marlene learned about the serious health effects of systemic racism. They also discussed their personal experiences with racism and some of the ways that it affects them. Defining in describing the physical, mental, and emotional effects of racial battle fatigue is an important step in coping with this condition. Another important part of the conversation was identifying unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as taking drugs or overeating, which can worsen the problem. Dr. Smith also presented healthy coping strategies such as therapy, learning your history, and talking with friends to deal with systemic racism. Overall, the important point made by Dr. Smith is that people of color do experience health consequences from the constant macro and microaggressions of systemic racism. But this has not been recognized by the medical community. The constant high levels of racism-induced stress can lead to depression, hypertension, diabetes, anxiety, insomnia, and many other disorders. Promoting healthy coping mechanisms is essential for the mental, physical, and emotional health of individuals and communities. Now, we have some questions for our audience. Do you think that racial battle fatigue is a real condition? If so, have you experienced it? What do you think are healthy ways to cope with the stress disorders caused by systemic racism?
Asante Sana Hans. Those are great questions. And to my audience, I hope that you will answer them. It's not just for me, but answering them is a form of coping. It's a coping strategy. And it does help. It's one step towards protecting and promoting your fight against racial battle fatigue and its effects on your mind, body, and spirit. I'll tell you where to send your answers in just a minute. In fact, I'll just tell you now. It's at team@espressotalktoday.com. No bother to write that down. It's on the website, and I'm going to repeat it anyway. Speaking of repeat, let me repeat Professor William Smith for a minute. We are not the problem. The problem is white supremacy. The problem is the white supremacist patriarchal system that's attacking black minds, bodies, and hearts. That is what is causing the problem. But, as Professor Smith also said, we get distracted and call it lots of other things, like black on black crime, or weak black families, or bad diets among black people. But they won't call it what it is: white supremacy. We black people are having a normal response to these repetitive stress injuries, to these attacks on our bodies and minds. We are normal. White supremacy and anti-black racism are not. It's not you, it's them. I hope you got this, because it is true. And so remember, my fellow warriors, know this deep in your soul. You are powerful beyond measure. Together we are invincible. And the problem, the real scourge on society globally, is white supremacy. You are not the problem. Asante Sana to Professor William Smith for his amazing research and work, and his continuing to work and to speak and to teach about racial battle fatigue. And I'm so glad that he joined us on today's show. We are truly blessed. Asante Sana to you, my dear audience, for being in the building today. This is not easy stuff to talk about, but you showed up, you showed courage, and you showed character. Shout out to you. If you want to keep discussing or reading about these issues, then I please would encourage you to subscribe to my weekly Black Empowerment newsletter, The Normal Beat. We discuss lots of different issues there, and you can get your dose of Black empowerment every single week. Never a dull moment. Lots of powerful, uplifting, and liberating moments, though. And you can subscribe at the Espresso Talk Today website at espressotalktoday.com or on Instagram at Ama Robin L. That's Ama, AMA, _ Robin, ROBIN, _ the letter L. Join us too on Instagram to discuss these issues, share your thoughts, and Find an uplifting and safe and healthy space where you are valued and heard. Find us again on Instagram at AmaRobinL. I'm Ama Robin for Espresso Talk Today, and remember, now more than ever, strength, soul, and reparations. Ashe, community.